The main character of a story has finally fought towards daylight after escaping from a forest full of creatures. He had to fight thousands of these creatures, and through these fights, he has gained power and strength. We cheer for the character to make it through and always take his side when he makes decisions. That is, until the plot twist. As the character finally makes it out of the forest, he hears a distant call of a hurt beast. He crawls out for his help, but the character smiles, and the beast is met with the tip of his sword. He walks away, swinging his sword around gleefully. It is then that we find out the main character has been the villain all along.
Hello everybody, my name is Jaden Gimbao.
And my name is Darren Kabibi.
What we have just read to you is a story about a main character who ends up being the villain.
And it may come to a surprise to you, but this story, no matter how different it is filled with plot twists and confusing turnarounds, which share similarities to what we are here to talk about.
The story of U.S. history.
U.S. history can be told and talked about in many different ways.
Sometimes teachers stay biased and teach as if America is a country of well-rounded decisions and people, providing students with fogged history that concludes America is the greatest nation.
While other teachers, though not many, teach history from different perspectives, so that we, as students, can draw our own conclusions and beliefs. What we have concluded from the teachings of Miss Ellis in U.S. history class is that the United States aren't always great decision makers, or the greatest nation it claims to be.
The United States, though the motto is land of the free, isn't as free as it seems, though it is close.
You hear that side?
Yeah, I know.
America is our home, and our class believes it is important to know the truth of our past.
Just like any other nation, they come with problems such as inequality, war, economic downfall, land problems, and much more.
And these problems are important to understand and know because it'll help us and generations to come not make the same mistakes of our American ancestors. Shut the fuck.
The U.S. has a long history we have learned a lot from. But just because we have hardships and bad decisions, it doesn't mean we're an evil nation.
We have our accomplishments and mistakes, and the nation is defined by both.
We have learned so much from U.S. history.
And everything we've learned has prepared us to answer the final cumulative question of the school year. And that is...
what is the true story of U.S. history?
Well, to answer that question, we need to take a step back into the past and go through the moments we've been through as a nation.
We believe that a lot of America's wrongdoings are covered in the tracks of false speculation, false and weak reasonings, and white American bias.
For instance, in 1943, during World War II, trouble echoed throughout the city streets.
It was a time of what America calls the Zoot Suit Riots. But what led up to this?
Good question, Jaden. In 1941, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, which led to the U.S. entering World War II. Because of this, Congress began the Bracero program, which recruited Mexican workers to the southwest of California in 1942.
But wasn't
Los Angeles was one of those cities.
But wasn't the population already booming in the 1920s?
Yeah, you're right, actually. More than 1 million people were living in LA after the Great Migration. And because of this, the increase of these migrants began creating racial tensions among many communities. Mexicans were one of those people to be affected by those racial tensions.
I heard they were working for below poverty level wages, and the city was segregated by socioeconomic status and race.
You're right. And because most of the servicemen stationed in LA were white, they were not used to that diversity.
So when do the Zoot Suits come in?
Well, the Zoot Suits are suits with high-waisted, wide-legged, tight-cuffed, and peg trousers, and a long coat with wide lapels and wide padded shoulders. They were very flashy and out there.
That sounds dope, but why were they racist about it?
Well, that's the thing. Zoot suits were mostly worn by people of color. Unwritten rules demanded that these people stay out of sight and hidden when in public spaces. But with the Zoot suits, it visually defied the norms of segregation.
And I'm assuming that some people didn't like that.
Yeah, honestly, they saw the Zoot suits as a waste of cloth and unpatriotic to the country. But that's not the only thing that led to the riots. On May 31, there was a fight between US servicemen and Mexican Americans. One serviceman was beaten, and this, plus the zoot suits, made 50 servicemen walk down the streets of LA and beat anyone who was wearing a zoot suit, or even looked Mexican American.
So it wasn't only the zoot suits, but it was racially motivated as well.
It was, and because of this, riots exploded throughout the next few days. Thousands joined and participated in these riots. When police joined the scene, the many that were arrested were not servicemen, but the zoot suiters themselves.
And the servicemen did this just because one sailor was beaten?
Yeah, and the blame was all put on the zoot suiters, even though the people who started these riots were the servicemen. In an excerpt from the Los Angeles Daily News in 1943, it states, "Zoot suiters are being arrested on all parts of LA County. Many have been caught with weapons, such as knives, hidden in their pants, and many sailors and servicemen have been victims of violence and casualties from the Pachuco hoodlums."
They're covering up for the servicemen.
Yeah, exactly. It shows how America and the media can be biased towards the more supreme group of people. More supreme. Mexicans were beaten on the streets just for wearing zoot suits, and when they tried fighting back, they were met with brutal consequences. America tried covering the blame and giving a false view on how this all went down.
It sort of reminds me of the Japanese internment during World War II.
Japanese internment?
Yeah. Japanese internment, when thousands of Japanese Americans were stripped from their homes and put into internment camps just for being Japanese.
Oh gosh, how can I forget about that?
Japanese internment, just like the Zoot Suit riots, is another time in history that America had made an illogical decision that was clouded with bias and bad reasoning. When Japan bombed Pearl Harbor and other U.S. naval bases along the Pacific in 1941, the U.S. immediately put in Executive Order 9066. First, a curfew was established. Second, movement was restricted. Then third, mandatory relocation to detention camps were ordered.
Oh wow. So what did that mean?
It meant that Japanese people, 67% of whom were Japanese American, would be forced to sell their businesses, leave their homes, and be placed within camps in 7 different states. 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry were affected. Read this quote by FDR for me, Darren.
Alright, so the quote is, "Go ahead and do anything you think necessary to protect the West Coast from potential Japanese spies and sabotage. If it involves citizens, we will take care of them too. There will probably be repercussions, but it has got to be dictated by military necessity. Be as reasonable as you can." Wow, so they assumed that these thousands of Japanese Americans may be spies?
Yes, they did. And what's funny is that no person of Japanese ancestry in the US was charged or convicted of espionage or sabotage, which means they went through the harsh internment camps that smell of horse crap for nothing.
Horse crap?
Yeah. Oh, did I also tell you about the living conditions?
No.
Some camps made Japanese Americans stay in horse stalls and racetracks. It was desolate, you had no privacy, a strict curfew, and barbed wire around the camp. American government tried to cover these harsh conditions through media and reasoning that were devised from speculation and racism. Read this quote from military commander John L. DeWitt, Darren.
The Japanese race is an enemy race, and while many second and third generation Japanese born on United States soil, possessed of United States citizenship, have been Americanized, the racial strains are undiluted.
Which means that even though these are American-born Japanese people, they are still considered enemies to the nation.
That's so bad.
America tried so hard to cover this up as right and reasonable, but in reality, it was filled with hardship and deprivation.
It really shows how the US has used weak reasonings and propaganda to hide the fact that what they are doing to these people is wrong and terrible. These Japanese Americans did nothing wrong, and yet they have to face the consequences of others' mistakes.
Exactly, now you get it.
Thanks, bro. I think that really resonates with something that happened years before the World War II.
How so?
Well, back in the mid to late 1800s, Americans worked hard to cover up all the wrongdoings towards the Native Americans living in America before anyone else came. So, as America took and took, the natives were pushed back. mile after mile, and they had no choice but to submit to the removal. False treaties were made, and even if resisted, the Americans still got their way.
That's really messed up.
Yeah, it's crazy. So, how did America treat other countries?
They basically manipulated other countries for their own benefit.
How so?
For example, the US manipulated Mexico's government for business profits and more leverage on their own government.
How did they do that?
Well, first, they sent US troops to rebellions trying to overthrow the government to put people they wanted in power.
Wow, so what other places have they taken advantage of?
Cuba was another place the US took advantage of.
So, what did America do to Cuba?
Basically, the US won a war against Spain, which led to Cuba being independent, but America put limitations on them. Cuba could not borrow from foreign powers. They gave the right for the US to intervene in Cuban affairs to protect American lives and property, and they gave the right for the US to establish 2 naval stations on the island. Cubans were not happy with this deal, but they had no choice to accept, because when they tried to revolt, it only led to the US restoring order again.
So, the US tried making themselves look good and make other countries think they're helping them, when really, the US just wanted benefits for themselves. Like in Cuba, they helped them, but they took from them as well.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, in conclusion, as much as the US succeeded with industrialization, power, and business, it came with a cost. Most of the bad deeds the US has done was covered up, and only the positive things remain talked about. It is important to know the origin of our country and take accountability in all the damage caused. And this is very important because if you don't know your history, how are you supposed to learn from it? The true story of the US depends on your perspective of it. If you are not given all the perspectives to see which one you want to follow, then how are you going to have the view on what America's story really is?
Yeah, and I think it's important to, like, even though Americans tried to repay for everything they did, you know, they can always be forgiven, but history cannot be forgotten. So I think it's important to remember, just to, you know, just to have it in mind. You know, we came from, like, not a good background. We came from a really bad background.
Yeah.
And even though, you know, we're like successful as a country, you know, there's still like some dark deeds that need to be talked about, and we need to be held like accountable for.
And they make up the whole story line, basically. Yeah.
Thank you for watching our Thank you for watching our video. Yes. My name was Jaden, and this is Darren.
Yeah. Thanks for watching. Why the fuck did I use Harry Potter?
Oh, alright.
Did you stop recording?